This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, any questions, guys, from yesterday's class? Anything that I can take? Anything that I can take before we move forward? There can be multiple pipelines. For a single release, there can be multiple CI pipelines out here. Yes, build pipelines and release are different. For example, this is pipeline, which is build. You have something called releases. So you attach a build to the release. Multiple builds can be attached to the same release out here. Is it separate? Yes. In which agent will it run? So it again depends upon what kind of a project that you're doing, whether you're doing a Python or .NET or something like that. If it's a Python project, you will need an Ubuntu machine or a Linux machine. If it's let's say you are an iOS developer, you will build it on top of the Mac OS out here. So it depends upon the kind of project that you are, let's say, working on. The OS changes. What kind of an agent is it? Hosted? Is it self-hosted? It completely depends upon the organization out here, which we'll talk about today. Hmm. Sorry. It's all automated process, yes. Meaning as when you commit it, it'll automatically go trigger. Yes. So this is something that you have to configure. You'll have to automate, leave it. That's it. It will kind of run. Yes. So you're automating the pipeline again. Just put the diagram in place. You have the repository. Let's put that in repos. You have a repository and you have a branch inside this repository called develop. So let's also put the branch here. And all the developers are committing to this particular branch via a pull request. Reason being, there are branch policies on top of it. So all the developers are now doing something known as a pull request out here. After that, you have a build pipeline in place, which is going ahead and triggering this out. Now I'm calling this particular build pipeline as a continuous integration pipeline. See, very importantly, for your projects to successfully go through, the reason you are using DevOps, one of the very important reasons that you're using DevOps is that your software development lifecycle has a proper flow. You're protecting your code, you're doing a proper flow. Also, this is fast and efficient and avoids less amount of human intervention, meaning someone doesn't have to come again, do a build, do a release, do a test, and all that stuff. You're including everything inside your pipelines only. This is the reason you're going for the software development lifecycle using some kind of a DevOps practice out here. Now, one of the key ingredient is the, let's say it's something called as fast, meaning this is fast. It is fast. Also, it is parallel, which means that let's say multiple developers are working in your organization. Again, yesterday's example, 10 developers are working in a particular hour. They are doing how many? Let's say one commit each. So you'll have what? 10 commits in a particular hour. Each and every commit will trigger a pipeline. Let's say in one particular given minute, 10 developers are doing 10 commits out here. This will trigger what? 10 pipelines. Agreed? So my question to Azure is that, or my question to Microsoft is that, will all these pipelines build parallelly together, or will they build serially? Serial, yes, it is serial because if I come here, let's say I trigger this pipeline manually, I'll say run this pipeline. This will automatically get triggered if there's a commit. So now there is one instance of the pipeline which is running. Same way, other developer did a commit, trigger this out. Third developer did a commit, trigger it out. For developer did a commit, trigger this out, and so on and so forth. Now this process will continuously keep happening, and I'm talking about an organization like, let's say, Google, which is building an Android project. Imagine how many developers will be keep. I mean, how many developers around the world will be working in that particular hour. Now, each and every pipeline, guys, in normally we are doing a simple pipeline, .NET build and all that stuff. But in a real-time environment, this pipeline can take about 10 minutes, which means that this developer, first developer, to see his changes will have to wait for what? 10 minutes. What about the second developer? How many minutes do you think this guy will have to wait to see his changes? Another 10 minutes, meaning he has to wait 10 minutes here and also 10 minutes while it's getting built, because pipelines get queued in something called as FIFO, first in first out, meaning this pipeline is first in, it'll get first built. Second pipeline is, this guy is taking 20 minutes out here. Third, 30, because 20 plus 10, 40, 50. Imagine if there are hundreds of developers out here. Imagine the last developer commits his code. He'll have to wait for a week for his code to actually build and test his changes, which is not ideal. So this is not a fast process at all, because it's very slow, very manual. I'll have to wait for a good amount of time for all the code to get built and then give my artifact out here. Only if I get my artifact will I be able to test it, right? So the first in first out process, or the serial builds, something which will not help me at all. In Azure DevOps, that's the reason there is a concept called parallelism. So I'm going to the setting, there's something called parallel jobs. See, when you requested for parallelism, Microsoft is going to give you one free parallel job out here. That's the reason your pipelines are going serial. This agent is occupied. Every time you're running a build, you're taking that agent only. And since you have only one agent, or your or your pipelines are getting queued. Imagine there are two, let's say, imagine there are two parallel jobs out here. There are two, which means two pipelines can trigger at one go. Whether it can be a build, it can be a release or something, which means that developers do not have to wait for such a big time. Imagine there are 20 parallel jobs, which means what? 20 pipelines can trigger at one go, can build at one go out here, which means 20 developers do not have to wait in a queue. They can just go ahead and, let's say, parallelly out here and, let's say, build this out. Just like you're opening multiple counters, or it's just like you're opening multiple channels for your pipelines to build. For this to happen, you'll have to purchase something called as what? Parallel jobs out here. Let's go there. Let's go into Azure DevOps pricing model to understand this out. Scroll down. I put this in INR and just scroll down out here. For one free parallel job, it's giving you what? 1800 minutes per a particular, let's say, month. And this is free. First parallel job is free. Now I need how many? 20, right? Let me put it as 20. What am I paying here? 3000 per a parallel job with unlimited minutes. This is around what? 62,921 rupees if I go for a hosted agent out here. Now, this is good. We can buy this out. We can leave the responsibility on Microsoft, pay 63,000 rupees out here per a month. Forget about it. Yes, it's a good option. But the issue with this is that you have no control on the machine that gets allocated, because this is a SaaS offering, software as a service. You cannot tell Microsoft that, you know what, I have 10 pipelines. One of the pipeline I am building AIML project, something like artificial intelligence. And usually, guys, when you talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, NLP, and all these things out, the size of the code is very big. It's not a very simple code. It's a very big code, which means in order to build the code, Even your machine has to support the same thing. Very simple. Take a 2 GB RAM machine, run an AIML code on that, your machine will crash. Same concept applies to a virtual machine also. But you don't have a control on the size of the machine what Microsoft gives you. They can give you a small machine, they can give you a big machine. Normally they maintain a particular size, and usually the size that they give you is not more than 4 core CPU. That's the standard size what they give you, which is not ideal for all the scenarios like AIML and all that stuff. It's not, let's say, really ideal for such a kind of a thing, for which you might want your own machines. See, if I have my own machine, I can control the size. I can say that it's not 4, it's 16 core machine. 16 core machine only needs to be dedicated to one pipeline called AIML pipeline. I want to build this out. Other .NET projects can go with 2 core machines and etc. And also, you create your own machines. If you go ahead and create your own, let's say, virtual machines or physical machines and etc., you'll also be able to adjust the size. Let's say the AML project is not functional anymore. You're not doing any build activity there. You can reduce the size, reduce your cost and etc. That's the reason most of the organization go for something called as a self-hosted option. Self-hosted machines, which kind of gives you the flexibility to tell how many machines you need, what is the size, what kind of a software. This is the opportunity that you do have. Also, if you go back into my settings, there's something called self-hosted agent. And even in self-hosted agent, I have just one parallel job. Meaning, if I want self-hosted agents and if I want parallel job, I'll have to purchase it. One parallel job free for a month. If I want 20, it is going to cost me around what? 22,000 rupees, which means buy three of what you are paying for a hosted agent out here. Hosted agents are costly. Self-hosted are cheap. But again, there is one more thing that you need to understand here is that you are paying around 22,000 rupees for 20 parallel jobs out here. Plus, you need to create VMs on your Azure portal. Even this will charge you, let's say, for let's say about 8 rupees per an hour or something. So the cost that you pay for Microsoft is this 22,000 rupees per month plus whatever cost you are getting from this particular virtual machine. So it's a cumulative cost. This is something that you'll have to, let's say, consider. So is it better? Far better than a hosted agent. In a hosted agent, the size of the machine is not that great. The capacity of the machine is not that great. So all these factors will hamper your SDLC. Meaning if the size of the machine is not big, even the pipeline will take a lot of time to build it out, which means your builds are going to take a lot of time, which means your release is going to take a lot of time, which means your delivery is also going to take a lot of time, which means your overall SDLC is going to get impacted out here. Reason being, a lot of organizations opt for self-hosted agents out here. That's what I'm coming down to, is that how do you go ahead, and till now I explained why do you need a self-hosted agent. Now we'll say how. How to configure a self-hosted agent, how to take your own agent out here and so on and so forth. Is any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here on why do you need a self-hosted machine versus a hosted agent out here as such? Mhm. You mean the virtual machine cost? Azure DevOps pricing? No, Azure DevOps pricing is simply based on the parallel jobs that you want. It's the parallelism, which means here you have what? One parallel job, meaning even if you have a self-hosted agent, your pipeline will still behave serially. But if you go for, let's say, I mean, again, the core capacity is something that they don't consider. It's just how many parallel jobs you need, how many parallel pipelines you want to trigger. This is what they consider. Yes, any more questions? Good till here. Can I move forward? All right, so let's go there. So very firstly, in order to understand the question on how do you want to configure, Very firstly, I would say you will need an infrastructure of your own. It can be an Azure VM, it can be an AWS virtual machine or an AWS EC2 instance. We call VM in AWS is EC2, or you can have a VM running on GCP, or you can have an on-premise server. Have your own on-premise servers out here, not a problem. Any one of the options, I'm good with that. B, you will have to have some kind of a login credentials to log into that particular machine, or you need to have access onto that particular machine. So login credentials out here. In my case, I have both. I have created a Windows Server 2019 2-core CPU machine on my Azure portal. With a public IP, I have access to it. Again, you don't really need a public IP for this. If you have a VPN established, you can simply take the private IP, configure the machine, that will still work. You don't really need a public IP, but if you are looking, let's say, at a private IP communication, make sure you have already a VPN established, either one of them. In my case, since I do not have a VPN, I just copy the public IP of this machine, and let's go into remote desktop, the public IP in, and give the credentials and connect to this particular machine out here. So this is what I'm doing right now. Okay, I might not be able to connect to this. I have disabled the RDP yesterday as a part of a demo. Let's see, it's a deny. RDP is here deny, so I won't be able to do this. So give me a second. I'll change this one to allow, so that I can allow myself over the RDP connection out here. Update the rule. Let's give it like about 2 or 3 minutes for the rule to get updated. And once the rule is updated, let's try this out once again. Let's go into the RDP and try this out once again out here. Let's go ahead and refresh this out. So rule is updated. I am now allowing RDP connection. So let me try this out once again. I'll copy the IP of this machine, go to the machine. I'll say connect this out. And let's go ahead into the machine right now. So I have the credentials of the machine. Firstly, I have the infrastructure, 2-core CPU, 7 GB RAM. I have the infrastructure created on the Azure portal. I have the login credentials. Also, I have RDP enabled, so I've logged in. Second thing is, what should I install on the machine? Do I have to do any kind of installations on this machine? Sorry, agent. But before agent, do I have to do anything else? IIS. Why do I need an IIS? It's not a web server that I'm creating. It's a build server that I'm creating. So why should I expose something like IIS? I don't even need an IIS. Very importantly, I'm using this machine to help my build pipeline to build a .NET application. If you want a .NET application to build, you need the SDK, something known as a .NET Software Development Kit, to be installed on the machine as well. So I will install the required softwares. Like for example, if you're running a PowerShell script, you will need the PowerShell module to be installed. Or if you're running, in my case, I'm doing a .NET build. So I need the .NET softwares to be installed. So I'll go back into my machine. I'll close this out. I have a Google Chrome browser installed. I'll use the Google Chrome and go to the required softwares, and I'll say .NET Core SDK download. Again, it's a .NET 6. I also have .NET 6. I have, let's say, something like .NET 3.1 and etc. So in here, it's a Windows machine. I'll say x64. I'll just download this out, install the .NET software out here. So the second thing is that I'm installing all the SDKs that I need, which is a software development kit, which will help me build my application. And once this is done, let me install this out. And I'll also install the .NET 3.1 long-term, let's say, support. Saying okay, fine, install this out. And I'm going ahead installing the runtime or installing the SDK out here. Second thing, I'm installing the SDK. Also, let me go ahead download the 3.1 SDK as well. It's 3.1, and in here I'll go ahead with the SDK called 64. And in here this should be done in a minute. And once that's done, I'll also install the 3.1 SDK out here as such. And after installation, it is always suggested to go ahead and restart your machine once, like after this one. Since it's a VM, I'm just ignoring this out. So I'll also go ahead and install this out. And once the installation is done, I'll start with my agent installation. So I'll say install, and this will take around a minute to go ahead and install it out. So I have both the SDKs installed. So I have all the softwares installed. In my case, the required softwares were just .NET SDK. The reason I'm installing SDK is that without SDK, I cannot do a .NET build. Neither I can do a .NET restore. Neither I can do a publish. All these will fail. So I had to put the SDK in. And once the SDK is done, I will now start configuring the agent. Let's go back into our machine. This is also done. So now let me do one thing. Let me come down to Azure Devops. So software installation is done. I'm coming to Azure Devops. I am going inside something called as project settings. So if you go inside your project, there is in the left hand bottom, there is something called project settings out here. Let's go there. In the project settings, there is something called agent pools. You have by default something called Azure pipelines. There is one agent called hosted agent out here. Let me come back. And there's one more pool called what? Default pool. I'll add my own pool. It's a self-hosted pool, and I'll say this is a DevOps 8 a.m. learning pool. Some random name that I'm giving out here, or a DevOps 8 a.m. pool or something like this. I'll say grant access to all the pipelines, and I'll say create. Now I created something called as what? A pool. Pool is nothing but it's like a resource group where all your agents are sitting in. It's like a folder where all your agents are sitting in here. Let me go here. In this, if I click on agents, it's telling add your first agent. I'll say okay, fine, new agent. It's telling what kind of an agent is it? Is it Windows, Mac, or Linux? In my case, it is a Windows agent, and it is also giving me instructions. It's telling firstly you'll have to download the agent software, then you'll have to run this particular PowerShell commands. I'll say okay, great. Let me copy the link. I'll download it directly from the virtual machine, from the VM. I'm going to the VM, pasting the link out here, and say enter. It has downloaded a zip file out here for me, and let me show the folder. So it's downloaded this zip file inside this particular folder. I'll say extract all. I'll extract this out inside my C drive of my computer, and I'll say new folder here. I'll say agent hyphen 01. Say extract this out. It's always suggested to have all your agent softwares inside a C drive because it will have much more access, a higher privilege, and all these things out. And this is going to take a minute or so. So I am downloading this out. So what I did here is if I have to put the step under the agent configuration, the very first thing that I'm doing is I created a pool. I said this is a self-hosted pool. Give a name to the pool. Once inside the pool, I said new agent, and there was a link to download the agent software. Download the agent software on the VM. Because if I download it on my machine, I in which ways have to transfer it to the VM. I'm directly downloading it on the VM to avoid that particular timeout there. And after, let's say, downloading, extracting all the files into my C drive. Into C drive out here. So let me go back. and it's almost done. And once it's done, I have all these files telling bin externals config and run. What I'll do is I'll click on this one and I'll say cmd. Open the command prompt directly in this particular folder, and in this folder, if I say ls, or okay, fine, not ls won't work out here. In this folder, there is this particular file called config. I'll say dot backslash in this folder. Go and get something called config.cmd. It's a command file, or it's a, let's say, batch file out here. I'm telling please open that file and say enter. This file will start the configuration for Azure DevOps out here. Sorry, this file will start configuration for Azure DevOps. Now it's telling welcome to Azure pipelines. Enter your server URL. Where do you get the server URL? Any idea? What is it telling? Why is it asking me for the server URL? Or what do we understand by this one called server URL out here?
Deploying the
Sorry, can you come again, please? What do we understand by the server URL? Did we give server URL anywhere before? Did we talk about any URL of Azure DevOps? So it's just asking you, where is the portal, or what is your Azure DevOps URL? Where do I configure this out? If I come back here into my DevOps portal, if I go into DevOps, that's the URL of my server, or that's the URL of my Azure DevOps. Just dev.azure.com / DevOps classes 1992. I'll just copy this out. Back, paste this out here. Done. I pasted my server URL. I'll say enter. Now it's telling enter the type of authentication. Very importantly, guys,